The last thing I bought her was an espresso machine. She said she needed it for clarity in the mornings. It cost $689. I remember the exact amount because it hit our account at 2:13 a.m. while I was grading tests. She was asleep in the other room, wrapped in the blanket I got her for our anniversary. The one she said made her feel safe. A week later, she texted me the words that unstitched everything. I want a divorce. All communication through my lawyer. No build-up. No fight. Not even a typo. Just corporate tone and perfect punctuation. Like I was being released from a lease. And maybe I was. But let me rewind not to introduce myself, because frankly, I'm too drained to tell you who I am anymore. Let's just say I'm the kind of guy who buys the extended warranty on microwaves. The kind who says no worries when the waiter brings the wrong dish. The kind of guy who builds someone else's castle and ends up sleeping in the shed. Anyway, back to the machine. It was still dripping espresso when I read that message. I was on my lunch break, working from home. The smell, that burnt, bitter steam, it suddenly made me nauseous. She wanted silence. She wanted legal filters. She wanted out. So I gave her exactly what she asked for. No reply. No emoji. No sarcastic gif. Just action. I opened my banking app. Canceled the card she used for gas and groceries. Turned off the autopay for her streaming services. Called the phone provider and dropped her from the plan. Closed the shared savings. I didn't even flinch. Not because I'm heartless, but because I'd spent the past 4 years feeling everything for both of us. And when someone cuts the cord with that much precision, the only respectful thing left to do is let the silence grow teeth. 72 hours passed. Nothing. Not a knock. Not a message. Not a single "hey, did you?" Until suddenly, the silence broke. Her lawyer called me. Panicked. Not annoyed, panicked. "Mr. Whitlow, we need to discuss the situation you've created for my client," he said, like I dropped her in the woods without shoes. I told him calmly. She asked for space and legal communication. I honored both. He kept talking, but I'd stopped listening. Because while he was stammering, my inbox pinged. A message from a burner email. Subject line, "You don't know the half of it." Attached, one image. Her. Candlelight. A man's hand resting on her leg. But here's the thing, it wasn't just any hand. It had a scar on the thumb. A scar I recognized. A scar I once cleaned with hydrogen peroxide and a Spider-Man Band-Aid. Because it belonged to someone I trusted more than her. And that's where the unraveling really begins. I stared at that photo longer than I care to admit. Not because I couldn't believe it, but because I could, and that's what made it worse. The angle was slightly off, like someone had taken it from across the room, behind a half-empty wine glass. But the hand, the scar, and the watch, oh, the damn watch, they made everything unmistakably real. It wasn't the romance or even the betrayal that broke me in that moment. It was the familiarity. The kind of pain that comes from realizing someone didn't just break your heart, they passed it around. The hand in the photo belonged to Carter, my cousin. Not a distant relative. Not a third removed who shows up for weddings and leaves before the cake. No. Carter grew up down the block from me. We shared toys, scraped knees, and later, beers and busted dreams. He was my best man at the wedding. He toasted her with tears in his eyes, saying she was the best thing that ever happened to Lowell. My mother once told me, if anything ever happened to you, I'd trust Carter to protect her. That sentence now felt like a cruel joke. I should have known. Not in a suspicious way, not that kind of knowing. But looking back, there were signs. Subtle overlaps. Glances that lasted half a second too long. Jokes that felt coded. Times when I'd come home and find them laughing on the back porch, only for the air to shift the moment I stepped outside. I always thought I was imagining it. That I was insecure. Overthinking. She told me more than once, "You always twist things into storms, Lowell. Calm down." Well, the storm's here now. I didn't respond to the email. Not because I didn't want to, but because I had no idea who sent it. No name. No return address. Just that single drop of poison and silence. I checked the email header, ran a trace. I know enough tech from teaching computer lab one semester, and all I got was a virtual dead end. But the timing? Too perfect to be random. That night, I sat in the empty apartment, surrounded by packed boxes. Not hers, mine. I had started packing without realizing it. One drawer here. A shelf there. Like some part of me knew I didn't belong in that space anymore. It still smelled like her, like vanilla and expensive shampoo. But the feeling in the walls had changed. Cold. Sterile. Like a hotel room someone had just checked out of. I couldn't sleep, So I opened her old laptop. She left it behind when she moved out, probably because it was slow and glitchy. But she'd forgotten something. She never logged out of her Google account. And that's when the pieces started falling into place. There were email drafts. Messages never sent. Dozens of them. Most were deleted, but a few were still sitting there, raw and unfinished. One said, "Carter, he's not going to suspect. He still thinks we're distant. I'm going to do it after the tax return clears." Another said, "I hate hurting him, but I can't keep pretending. He's so small, so soft. I need someone who knows who they are." That one stung more than the rest. Small, soft. I closed the laptop without reading more. I didn't cry. I wanted to. I think my body tried. But it was like the tears had already been spent somewhere along the way, drained by years of quiet disappointment and sleeping on the edge of my own marriage. The next morning, her lawyer called again. This time, not as frantic. "We're hoping to resolve this amicably," he said, his tone smoother, as if I were a stubborn client who just needed the right kind of pressure. "My client feels she deserves a portion of the savings, considering the duration of the marriage." I asked him plainly, "Does your client also feel she deserves my cousin?" He went quiet, long enough for me to hear my heartbeat in my ears. "I'm sorry," he finally asked. "Ask her," I said, and hung up. 5 minutes later, I got a text. From her. First contact since the original message. I didn't mean for it to come out this way. That sentence broke something in me. This way? As if the timing was the problem, not the betrayal. As if I should be mad about how I found out, not what I found out. She followed up. "Can we talk? No lawyers. Just us." I didn't reply. Instead, I went to the guest room, opened the last box I hadn't touched, and pulled out a small envelope from the bottom. Inside was a letter I wrote her 4 years ago on our 5th anniversary. A dumb little tradition I had. I used to write her one every year. Folded, handwritten, sealed. I don't even think she opened the last 2. I burned it. Right there, on the balcony. Let the flame take it. Let the smoke carry the last bit of hope out of me. As the paper curled and blackened, I realized something else. I wasn't mourning her. I was mourning me. The version of me who believed in her. The man who thought loyalty was enough. And now that man was gone. But the part of me that was still here? He wasn't going to fade quietly. It was a Thursday when she showed up at the door. That specific kind of Thursday that doesn't feel like the beginning or the end of anything, just one long, dragging middle. I was in the kitchen reheating leftover soup and listening to the sound of my neighbor's dog barking like it always does when a car parks near the complex. It's strange what you remember when you're in shock. Not the color of her coat. Not the look in her eyes. Just the sound of that damn dog barking through the wall like it was warning me. Don't open that door. But I did. She stood there like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't detonated a bomb and walked away from the flames. Hair curled. Minimal makeup. Her signature, "I'm here to de-escalate," sweater, a gray one with loose sleeves she used to wear when we argued, because it made her look soft and approachable. Except now, it just looked like armor. "Lowell," she said. I didn't answer. I stepped aside and let her in, not because I wanted to, I didn't, but because some part of me still operated on autopilot. Like muscle memory from a dead relationship. She walked in slowly, like a guest. Her eyes swept across the living room. She noticed the boxes, the empty bookshelves, the missing wedding photo above the mantel. "You've been packing." No response from me. She sat on the edge of the couch. The same spot where she once told me she was proud of the man I was becoming. That sentence echoed now like a ghost in my head. "I got your message," she said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "About Carter." Still, I said nothing. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water just so I had something to hold. Something to keep my hands from clenching. It didn't start the way you think," she continued. "After your mom's surgery, when you were busy all the time, and I felt like I didn't exist." I laughed. That surprised her. It surprised me too. "You didn't exist?" I asked, finally breaking the silence. "You were the only one I thought about. I was working late shifts to pay for the hospital bills and driving 2 hours back and forth so I can still be here every night. You had everything. You just wanted more." Her face shifted. That wounded look women use when they realize they've lost control of the narrative. "It wasn't about more," she said softly. "It was about me." "No," I corrected. "It was about Carter. It was always about Carter." She bit her lip and looked down, silent, which was confirmation enough. But then came the real gut punch. She looked back up and asked, almost nervously, "Did someone tell you? Or Did you just figure it out? That question, that exact question tore through me harder than the affair itself. Because it wasn't a denial. It was damage control. She wasn't sorry for what she did, she was sorry I knew. I got an email, I told her, walking back to the couch but not sitting down. With a photo. From someone who apparently thinks I deserve the truth more than you do. Her eyes widened for a second, then narrowed, calculating. Can I see it? She asked. No, I replied. You don't get to manage the fallout. Not anymore. Silence again. Then she said something I will never forget. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true, and it changed the entire direction of everything that followed. I didn't think you'd ever react like this, she said, shaking her head. You're not the kind of guy who fights back. It wasn't even an insult. It was a simple observation. A known fact in her world. I was the predictable one. The soft shoulder. The backup plan. The man who would cry into his pillow while she packed up and reinvented herself without consequence. You're right, I admitted. I'm not the guy who fights back. I'm the guy who watches. And collects. And waits. She froze. I reached into the folder on the counter and pulled out a manila envelope. Dropped it on the table in front of her. Inside were bank statements. Timestamps. Screenshots. A copy of the letter she'd drafted for Carter but never sent. The one I found in her Google Drafts. I already gave these to my lawyer, I said, not because I wanted to be cold, but because I needed her to know I wasn't bluffing. This isn't revenge. This is survival. She opened the envelope. Her hands trembled. And for the first time in all of this, she looked scared. Not sad. Not angry. Scared. She stood up suddenly. I didn't come here to be threatened. I shook my head. You weren't. You were warned. That's when she reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and showed me something that stopped my breath short. Then maybe you should know something too, she said. On her screen was a message thread. Between her and Carter. Except the messages weren't from last week or last month. They were from almost a year ago. And in one of them, Carter had written, Don't worry. He'll never believe me over you. Just get the account moved and we'll be gone by June. And her reply? Lowell's not even paying attention. I already changed the passwords. He'll find out when it's too late. I stared at that screen and felt everything in my body go numb. My mouth went dry. My legs weakened. Because now I understood, this wasn't just emotional betrayal. This was financial theft. Premeditated. Documented. And the worst part? She hadn't shown me the texts to confess. She showed them because she wanted me to understand her side of it. She actually believed this would justify something. I took a long breath and stepped back. You need to leave, I said, voice low. Right now. Lowell, wait. Now, I snapped, louder than I'd spoken in days. She flinched, gathered her bag, walked to the door. But just before she stepped out, she turned and said one more thing. You think this is the worst of it? She asked. You still don't know who sent you that email. And then she left. I stood there in silence, wondering if she was bluffing. But 2 hours later, I got another anonymous message. This time, it was a video. I should have deleted the message. I should have dropped my phone in a drawer and left the apartment for a walk or a drive or something that didn't involve standing alone in my kitchen staring at a blinking notification. But I didn't. Because deep down, I already knew that this video wasn't just a clue, it was confirmation. I tapped on it. It didn't buffer. It opened instantly, like it had been waiting for me. The footage was grainy, like it was filmed from a hallway security camera. No sound, low resolution. But what it showed couldn't have been clearer. It was a hotel corridor. I recognized the carpet pattern immediately, Clove and I had stayed at that same boutique hotel for our 4th anniversary. Back then, she said she loved the urban vintage aesthetic. Now I knew it was also the place she used for her meetups. The timestamp in the corner read March 11th, 8:42 p.m. Months before she ever mentioned divorce. In the video, she appeared from the elevator in a red coat I bought her last Christmas. She wasn't alone. Carter followed, laughing, his hand grazing her back like it had done it 100 times. They stopped outside room 214. She turned to him. He leaned in. They kissed. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment kiss. It was practiced. Familiar. Then she took out a keycard and swiped the door open. She'd already booked the room. I stood there, jaw clenched, trying not to feel what I felt. Betrayal was no longer a shock. It had calcified into something colder, deeper. But the video didn't end there. That would have been enough. That would have ruined me, sure. But what came next, it changed the story entirely. About 10 seconds after they entered the room, Another figure came into view. A woman. Tall, long coat, dark hair. She paused outside room 214. Looked at the door. Looked down the hallway. Then, just as she turned toward the camera, she pulled her hood back slightly. And I saw her face. It was Riley, Clove's best friend. Maid of honor at our wedding. Godmother to her nephew. The woman she called her ride or die. I dropped the phone. It hit the tile floor and bounced once before landing face up. The video frozen on Riley's face like she was staring at me. I didn't know what to do. That footage, whatever it meant, it told me this was more than cheating. This was organized. Thought out. It wasn't two people stumbling into a mistake. This was layered. Hidden. Planned. A web I hadn't seen because I was too busy believing I was the boring, reliable husband. The man with no reason to suspect his world was slowly being hollowed out behind his back. After a few shaky breaths, I grabbed the phone again and rewound the video. I watched Riley step closer to the door. She didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. She used her own keycard and let herself into the room with them. And then the video cut off. No context. No sound. Just enough to rip open a new hole in my chest. Why was she there? Why did she have a key? What were the three of them doing? I was spiraling. I knew I was. I walked to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face, gripping the edges of the sink like it was the only thing keeping me upright. The water dripped down my nose, onto my shirt, soaking into the collar. I stared at my reflection and felt like I was looking at someone else. Someone stupid. Someone expendable. A soft ding from my phone broke the stillness. Another message. Room 214 wasn't the only one. Look under your bed. No signature. No context. Just that. I didn't move for a solid minute. My mind screamed every warning it could. It was a trick. It was a setup. It was paranoia. But eventually, I walked to the bedroom, dropped to my knees, and reached underneath. There was a shoebox I didn't recognize. I slid it out and lifted the lid. Inside were photographs. Dozens. All printed. All candid. Most were of Clove and Carter at restaurants, walking through parks, getting into cars I didn't recognize. But a few were of me. At the grocery store. At work. Even one through the window of our apartment as I sat on the couch watching TV. They had been watching me. Tracking me. There was also a USB drive. I plugged it into my laptop without thinking. At this point, I didn't care if it was a virus. I needed to know. It contained one folder. Labeled Exit Plan. Inside were scanned documents. Transfers. Account statements. Legal drafts. A template for a new business license, under Clove's name and Carter's address. The LLC had been filed in another state. 3 months ago. It wasn't an affair. It was a heist. They weren't just replacing me emotionally. They were building an entirely new life, business and all, using the resources they siphoned from me. And then I found the final file. A Word document titled What He'll Believe. I opened it. It was a full psychological profile. Of me. Bullet points about my behavior. My patterns. My weaknesses. Ways to manipulate my reactions. Notes about what kind of statements would keep me quiet. It was like they'd been studying me for years and turning my personality into a weapon against me. I sat there, stunned, heart pounding, air thick and metallic in my lungs. They weren't trying to leave me. They were trying to erase me. And whoever was sending these messages, they weren't done yet. Because just before midnight, a new text appeared on my phone. If you want the truth, meet me tomorrow. Alone. 9 a.m. Cemetery bench. North side. I should have ignored it. But I didn't. Because now, I had nothing left to lose. The next morning, the sky was the color of wet concrete, and everything smelled like damp leaves and distance. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. My mind kept looping the footage from that hotel hallway, the message, the shoebox, the documents, all of it crashing into each other like waves in a bottle. By the time 8:30 a.m. rolled around, I was already in the car, engine running, hands trembling on the steering wheel like they were waiting for me to come to my senses and drive anywhere else. But I didn't. I drove to the cemetery. Not the big public one with manicured lawns and marble mausoleums, but the smaller one tucked between a churchyard and a wooded hill, the one Clove used to call weirdly peaceful. She once told me, on a walk through it years ago, if I ever vanish, check here first. At the time, I laughed. Now I parked outside that very gate, my chest full of cement. I found the bench easily. North side. Weathered wood. Moss along the bottom edge. I sat. Waited. For 10 minutes, nothing happened. Then, a woman appeared. She didn't say anything right away. Just stood a few feet away, watching me the way you might watch an injured animal you're about to approach. She wore a navy hoodie, jeans, sunglasses despite the cloud cover. But when she pulled them down, I recognized her instantly. Her name was Nia. I hadn't seen her in years, not since Clove cut her out of her life for being too judgmental. Back then, Nia had been her closest confidant, the only friend who didn't treat marriage like a seasonal phase. She and I had gotten along too well, if I'm being honest, not in a flirtatious way, just real. She asked questions Clove wouldn't answer. She noticed things. She sat down beside me, slowly. Look straight ahead. I tried to warn you, she said. I swallowed hard. The emails, the video, that was you? She nodded. Some of them. The box? That wasn't me. My blood froze. Then who? I don't know. But someone else is watching them. I just wanted you to see what they were doing. You deserve that. I looked at her, mouth dry. Why now? Because they crossed a line, she said, finally turning to face me. At first, it was just gossip. Little things I overheard from mutuals, that Carter and Clove were closer than they claimed, that money was being funneled. I thought maybe it was just emotional cheating. I told myself it wasn't my place. But then, they used your information to open a credit line. In your name. I blinked. What? I have proof, she said. I had a friend in banking look into it. They used your SSN and fake signatures to open an account. I've been compiling it, slowly. They think you're too passive to notice. My throat tightened. 1,000 things clicked into place. The bounced payment from last month. The overdraft I thought was a glitch. The weird bank statement I brushed off as a clerical error. I whispered, they're going to ruin me. Nia looked at me with pity and exhaustion. They're already trying. And if you don't fight back, they'll finish the job. I leaned forward, elbows on knees, hard hammering. But why? I mean, what's the endgame? Just money. She hesitated, then said something I never expected. They think you're hiding something. I turned toward her, confused. What? They think you have an inheritance coming. Something from your grandfather's estate. Carter heard a rumor, and Clove latched onto it. They started planning around it. Filing early claims. Setting up shell accounts. That business they registered? It was meant to wash the money once it came through. I felt like I was going to be sick. There is no inheritance. She nodded. I know, but they don't. And by the time they find that out, they'll have already taken everything else from you. I stood up, pacing in front of the bench, trying to breathe. So what now? I go to the police? Not yet, she said, pulling a flash drive from her pocket and handing it to me. Take this to your lawyer. Make copies. Get it timestamped. If they try to move anything else, you'll have leverage. I took the drive with shaking hands. Why are you helping me? She looked away, then back at me with something close to regret. Because I once loved her too, she said. Not romantically, but as a friend, as a sister, and watching what she's become. I can't stand by anymore. Someone has to stop her before she destroys another person who doesn't deserve it. I sat back down, suddenly overwhelmed with grief I didn't know I still had in me. What do I do now? I whispered. Nia didn't answer immediately. She let the question hang in the air like smoke. Then, softly, she said, you prepare. You protect yourself. And when the time is right, you let them burn their own house down. We sat in silence for a while longer before she stood and walked away, disappearing down the path between headstones like a ghost in denim. I stared at the flash drive in my hand. It felt heavier than it should, like it held not just proof, but justice. When I got back to my apartment, I opened it, and what I found inside made the hotel video look tame. Dozens of files. Audio, images, screenshots. One labeled Plan B, if Lowell finds out. And buried at the bottom of the folder, a scanned letter addressed to my employer. They were going to try and get me fired next. I didn't even realize I'd stopped breathing until the sound of my laptop fan kicked on. The screen lit up with rows of files, each one like a loaded weapon I never knew they were hiding. The one that caught my eye first was titled letter_district_admin.pdf. I clicked it, heart pounding in my ears, nausea already swirling in my gut. It was a letter drafted on official-looking stationery, my school district's letterhead copied and pasted into a Word doc. It accused me of inappropriate emotional conduct with a student's parent, of frequent unexplained absences, and even hinted at prescription medication abuse. It was signed, albeit digitally, by someone I'd never met, a made-up name, but listed as concerned parent advocate. And at the bottom, it said, We believe Mr. Whitlow may be mentally unwell and should be removed from classroom access while an investigation is pending. They were trying to get me terminated. Not just cut out of a marriage, not just drained financially, but stripped of the only stability I had left. My job, my reputation, my last shred of normalcy. I sat back from the screen, palms sweating against the table's edge. There was a weight in my chest like someone had nailed me into the floor. I looked around my apartment, the same beige walls, the same fading photos, the framed concert ticket from our first trip together. And I suddenly hated everything, every object, every corner, because all of it was built on a lie I mistook for love. The betrayal wasn't just about Carter. It wasn't just about money. It was about destruction. They were trying to reduce me to a version of myself that couldn't speak, couldn't fight back, couldn't exist. I clicked through the other folders with shaking fingers. There were spreadsheets detailing transactions under my name, purchases I never made. A few marked with notes like, reimburse later, maybe, and Lowell doesn't track this account. One image showed Carter holding what looked like a new car key. Another showed Clove sitting on the lap of a man I didn't recognize at some rooftop event, her wedding ring clearly removed. But it was the audio files that hit the hardest. One was labeled Strategy Call 02_16.mp3. I clicked play. Clove's voice came on first. Okay, so if we time this around the break in March, he won't notice the account dip until after the first direct deposit. And I already drafted a backup story if he asks about the insurance transfer. Then Carter chimed in. He's harmless. Trust me. Lowell would rather collapse in silence than cause a scene. You know how he is. He still apologizes when the delivery guy's late. They both laughed. She added, that's why it works. Because he's predictable. He's soft. That man wouldn't punch back if he caught us mid-kiss. Another laugh. Then static. I sat frozen, listening to my own name pass between them like a joke. I hadn't realized how cruel people could sound when they thought the person they were mocking would never hear them. I opened one last file. A photo. It was taken in my classroom. My classroom. It showed me standing by the chalkboard, talking to students. The shot was through the small window in the door. I never saw anyone take it. The timestamp was from 2 weeks ago. I had never felt more violated in my life. Someone had been inside my work, following me, photographing me. For what? Evidence? Leverage? My hands finally gave out. I pushed back from the table, dizzy, lightheaded. I stumbled into the bathroom and stared at myself in the mirror. My eyes looked hollow. My face was pale. I looked like someone halfway through disappearing. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up on the couch, clutching the flash drive like it was a life preserver. I knew I needed to act, but part of me didn't even know where to begin. The people I had loved, trusted, were orchestrating a complete demolition of my life, and I'd only just woken up to the sound of the wrecking ball. By morning, I made a decision. I called my lawyer, told him everything, sent him the files. He listened in silence, then said something I'll never forget. Lowell, this is no longer just a divorce case. You're the target of coordinated fraud and reputational sabotage, and you need to file for protection. Today. So we did. We filed a restraining order. We initiated a digital forensic investigation. We got subpoenas lined up. It all started moving quickly, faster than I could process emotionally. But I kept going. Because I had to. And then, just when I thought I might have a chance at pulling myself out of the wreckage, I got another text. From Clove. I heard you've been busy. Lowell, this doesn't have to turn ugly. Let's talk before lawyers make it worse. As if I was the one escalating things. As if she hadn't drafted a letter to get me fired. As if she hadn't been sleeping with my cousin and siphoning money through shadow accounts for a business I was never meant to know existed. I didn't answer. But 5 minutes later, she showed up. Again. This time with someone new. Not Carter. Someone worse. She didn't knock this time. She buzzed the intercom and waited. I was sitting in the living room, frozen, heart pounding before I even stood up. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't want to confront her, but because I didn't want to see who she brought with her. I already knew it wasn't Carter. I could hear the voices through the speaker. Hers, rehearsed, sweet like syrup, and the deeper one beside her. I didn't recognize it at first. Then I did. Miles. My former landlord. Not just a property manager. Not just a suit behind a clipboard. This man had keys. He had access. He knew everything about the building, who lived where, who came and went, who paid rent late, and who never complained when the water pressure dropped. He also happened to be Carter's college roommate. Something Clove told me once and laughed off, calling it a weird coincidence when we signed the lease 2 years ago. I stood there behind the door, heartbeat hammering in my ears, and listened as Miles spoke into the intercom. Lowell, it's Miles. We need to have a quick chat about the property. Recent issues. Clove cut in immediately after, her voice carefully polite. I'm just here to mediate, sweetheart. Please don't be dramatic. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just backed away from the door slowly and sat down on the edge of the couch. I stared at the floor and realized something chilling. They weren't there for a conversation. They were there to remove me. I opened my laptop and checked my tenant portal. My rent was paid on time, as always, but a new file had been uploaded. I opened it with trembling hands. Notice of lease termination, violation of Clause 8C. I scrolled through. According to the document, I had been in material breach of lease due to behavior causing discomfort to other tenants and erratic mental episodes. At the bottom, it said, vacate within 7 days or legal action will be pursued. My lungs locked up. They weren't just trying to ruin me financially or professionally. They were trying to make me homeless. I called my lawyer immediately. He answered on the first ring. I told him what was happening. He told me not to open the door, that he'd be filing for an emergency injunction within the hour. I nodded, pacing now, hands shaking. Then I heard the key. They had a key. Of course they did. Miles owned the building. Clove was still technically on the lease. I ran to the door and threw the deadbolt, pressing my entire weight against it just as it shifted. Lowell, come on, Clove's voice said through the crack. We just want to talk. You're being paranoid. Miles added, you're making this harder than it needs to be. Let's be civil. I shouted through the door. Leave. Now. Or I call the police. Clove's tone dropped. No sweetness. Just ice. You're spiraling, Lowell. This isn't healthy. We can help you, or you can make things worse. That was it. The mask off. There it was, the threat disguised as concern. The subtle way manipulators justified dismantling your life under the pretense of care. I did call the police. They arrived 15 minutes later. By then, Clove and Miles were already gone. But the officers documented the incident, took photos, took my statement. My lawyer called again and told me the injunction was being filed and that we'd have a temporary protection order against unlawful eviction by morning. But that night, I didn't feel victorious. I felt exposed. Because if they were willing to stoop this low, what else were they planning? The files, the video, the financial sabotage, the coordinated smear attempt, and now this? I couldn't sleep. I didn't even bother trying. I sat up all night at my desk writing a timeline of every event, every document, every clue I'd received, trying to see the full picture. And then something clicked. A small detail from the Plan B folder Nia gave me. There was a draft email to someone with the initials JF, titled Confirm Receipt of Transcript Edits. I hadn't paid it much attention before, but now I did a reverse email lookup. JF stood for Jordan Fisk, the superintendent of my school district. Suddenly, everything made sense. This wasn't just about Clove. This wasn't just about Carter. There were more people involved. And Jordan Fisk? He had been under scrutiny 2 years ago for favoritism, quietly buried, swept under the rug. One of the names tied to the investigation? Miles. This went deeper than betrayal. Deeper than a bitter ex and a scheming cousin. I was inside something I didn't fully understand yet. But I was done being the soft-spoken fool. The next morning, I printed every document, organized every folder, labeled every screenshot. My lawyer and I met face-to-face and began preparing a full civil suit. Fraud. Identity theft. Conspiracy to defraud. Harassment. Defamation. Malicious eviction attempt. We weren't just defending anymore. We were going on offense. And then, just when I thought the storm had finally broken, I got one last message. It was from a number I didn't recognize. One sentence. You think she chose Carter on her own? I stared at it, heart pounding. My hands went cold. Because suddenly, I realized I hadn't reached the bottom yet. There was still one more layer to uncover. That message, you think she chose Carter on her own? Wasn't just a question. It was a detonator. Everything I thought I knew, every theory I'd carefully assembled like a house of cards, suddenly felt unstable again. I sat there for minutes, phone in hand, rereading those words until they stopped making grammatical sense. Then I responded. Who are you? No reply. Nothing. No typing dots. No read receipt. Just silence. And somehow, that silence was more unsettling than everything else combined. Because it told me this person, whoever they were, had already said all they needed to. The implication was enough. I didn't sleep that night. Again. But I didn't feel weak anymore. I didn't feel pathetic. I felt ready. The next morning, Nia called. She sounded different, tense but energized. "I think I know who's behind all of it," she said. "Not just Clove. Not just Carter. The real one. The person who put this in motion." I listened in silence as she told me what she'd found, a series of emails between Carter and an untraceable encrypted account. Some of the emails referenced targets, timelines, and even discussed specific language to use in emotionally manipulating someone. The chilling part? These emails predated Clove's first major withdrawal from our account. They went back almost 2 years. Nia traced one of the usernames from an old online alias Carter used in college, back when he was part of a social hacking forum. Back when he thought it was fun to manipulate people for sport. Turns out, Carter and a small circle of his tech-savvy friends had been testing psychological games on real people, the way marketers test ad campaigns. Clove, she discovered, had been the experiment at first. But somewhere along the way, she leaned into it. She became the system. I don't know how much of it was real, how much she planned, how much she was pressured. But I knew one thing for certain: I was done being their subject. Within weeks, things changed. My lawyer delivered the full civil complaint to Clove's attorney, Carter, and Miles. The documents were damning, detailed, time-stamped, cross-referenced. There was no hiding anymore. No twisting the narrative. They tried to settle quietly, of course. Offer me hush money. Promise me the business would be dissolved. That the false claims would vanish if I walked away. I didn't accept. Because this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about principle. The school district dropped the internal inquiry against me within days of receiving the forensic report. My lawyer hand-delivered a copy of the manipulated letter that Clove and Miles had been planning to send, along with proof of its digital creation on Clove's laptop. Superintendent Fisk resigned a week later, quietly and without a statement. And Miles? He was removed from the management company after we filed formal complaints backed by legal action and video evidence of his attempted forced entry. But what happened to Clove? She lost her case. She lost her brand. She lost her influence, not because I destroyed her, but because I stopped carrying the weight of her lies. She tried to pivot, change her name online, start fresh. But Nia, bless her, had the truth. And she made sure the people around her knew what Clove had done, not out of spite, but out of accountability. Carter vanished. Last I heard, he'd taken a contract job out of state and shut down all social media. I didn't care where he went. He could vanish into a cave, and it still wouldn't be far enough. And me? I moved. I found a small place about an hour away. A little crooked house with a warped porch and a garden I never knew I'd love this much. I transferred to a different school in a quieter district, where the kids actually thank you for showing up. I started playing piano again. Not professionally, just for me. And one day, while I was at the farmer's market trying to pick between 2 overpriced jars of jam, I met someone. Her name was Elise. She was kind, careful with her words, and had the softest way of laughing like she was still surprised by joy. We didn't rush it. We went slow. But every time she asked me a question, I could feel a version of myself I thought I'd buried, starting to breathe again. A year later, I finally opened the last envelope Clove ever sent me, one she mailed after the trial, after the settlements, after the dust had settled. It wasn't dramatic. No apology. No blame. Just one sentence. "I'm sorry, I didn't know how to love someone who stayed." I folded it back up and put it away. Because I don't need someone who regrets the ending. I need someone who respects the beginning.